I never thought I'd have to defend my home from someone trying to steal it. Especially not from Karen Winters, the president of our homeowners association. But that's exactly what happened after my appendix ruptured and landed me in the hospital for 3 weeks. It all started 6 months ago when I moved into Willow Creek Estates, a quiet suburban neighborhood with manicured lawns and strict HOA rules. I'm an architect who works from home, and I'd saved for years to buy my dream house the day I moved in. Karen introduced herself with a clipboard in hand and a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Welcome to Willow Creek," she said with a tone that suggested I should feel honored to be in her presence. "I'm Karen Winters, president. HOA Karen of the Homeowners Association. You'll need to familiarize yourself with our bylaws immediately. We don't tolerate rule breakers here." She handed me a 3-in binder filled with regulations while scanning my moving boxes like a customs agent searching for contraband. "Your mailbox is 2 in taller than regulation. You'll need to replace it within 7 days or you'll face a fine." I thanked her politely and promised to review the guidelines, which seemed to disappoint her. I later learned from my neighbor Tom that Karen thrived on confrontation and wielded her HOA power like a weapon. She's been president for 5 years because nobody wants to run against her, Tom explained with a tired sigh. "Most people just try to stay off her radar. For the first few months I managed to follow the rules and keep interactions with Karen to a minimum. But everything changed when I decided to plant a vegetable garden in my backyard. According to the HOA bylaws, gardens were permitted as long as they weren't visible from the street. Mine was completely hidden behind my house, surrounded by a decorative fence. Karen, however, had other ideas. She appeared at my door one Saturday morning, her face flushed with what I can only describe as righteous indignation. "Your garden violates Section 12, Paragraph 4 of our bylaws," she stated with a smug expression. "Vegetable gardens must be approved by the landscaping committee, which I chair." I showed her the relevant section in the very binder she'd given me, which clearly stated gardens just needed to be out of street view and quote, "I think there's been a misunderstanding," and quote, I said calmly, and quote, "The bylaws don't mention committee approval for gardens that aren't visible from the street," and quote. Her eyes narrowed dangerously, and quote, "Well, perhaps the bylaws need updating. Until then, remove it by Monday or you'll be fined $50 per day," and quote. I stood my ground and refused to remove my garden. Karen began documenting every perceived violation of my property. My grass being a 4 in 2 tall, my garbage can being visible for 30 minutes after collection, the color of my garden hose being distracting. The fines started piling up, but I contested each one at the monthly HOA meetings, citing the actual bylaws to the board members who often overturned Karen's decisions. This infuriated her more than anything else. Karen wasn't used to being challenged, especially not successfully and publicly. After one particularly heated meeting where the board unanimously ruled in my favor regarding the garden dispute, she cornered me in the parking lot. "You think you're so clever," she hissed through hospitalized gritted teeth. "Nobody has ever made me look foolish in front of the board. Nobody. You'll regret moving into Willow Creek, I promise you that." I brushed off her threat as the tantrum of someone unaccustomed to not getting her way. That was my mistake. Karen Winters didn't make idle threats, as I would soon discover. About 2 weeks later, I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning with excruciating abdominal pain. I called 911 and was rushed to the hospital, where doctors diagnosed a ruptured appendix requiring emergency surgery. Complications led to sepsis, and what should have been a routine procedure turned into a 3-week hospital stay, followed by another 2 weeks of home recovery while I was fighting for my life. Karen was apparently fighting for my house. Tom later told me he'd seen her entering and leaving my property multiple times, but she told everyone she was checking on things at my request and watering the plants while I was hospitalized. In reality, she was setting up an elaborate scheme to steal my home out from under me. On my first day back from the hospital, still weak and moving slowly, I found an official-looking notice taped to my front door. It stated that due to abandoned property regulations, my home had been claimed by the HOA and was now under new ownership. The document cited a deed transfer that had allegedly taken place 2 weeks prior. I immediately called the county clerk's office only to be told that yes, there was indeed a deed transfer on file showing I had sold my home to Karen Winters for $1. According to their records, I had personally appeared before a notary and signed over my house while I was in reality unconscious in an intensive care unit. And quote, "This is fraud," and quote, I told the clerk, my voice shaking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. And quote, "I was in the hospital, I couldn't have signed anything." And quote, the clerk expressed sympathy but explained I would need to file a legal challenge to the deed transfer. Meanwhile, Karen had already filed an eviction notice giving me 72 hours to vacate her property. I called my cousin Jennifer, who happens to be an attorney specializing in real estate law. She came over, immediately reviewed the documents and assured me this was an open and shut case of fraud, but we need to move quickly. She warned we need to get an emergency injunction to stop the eviction and then file criminal charges for fraud, forgery, and breaking and entering. Jennifer worked through the night preparing our legal response. While I tried to gather evidence, I contacted the hospital for documentation of my stay, complete with timestamps showing I was physically incapable of appearing before any notary. I also installed security cameras just in case Karen tried anything else. Sure enough, the next morning Karen appeared at my door with 2 men I didn't recognize. "These gentlemen will be helping you move your belongings," she announced with a triumphant smile. "I've generously given you until 5 p.m. today instead of waiting for the official eviction." I stood in the doorway blocking her entry. "Karen, you forged a deed transfer while I was hospitalized. That's a felony. My attorney has already filed for an emergency injunction and is in the process of filing criminal charges against you." Her smile faltered for just a moment before she composed herself. "That's ridiculous. You signed the papers. Caught yourself. I have a notarized document proving it. I was in intensive care, unconscious from sepsis," I replied, holding up my hospital documentation. "And the security cameras I installed last night have just recorded you admitting you expect me to vacate a home you fraudulently claimed. Would you like to continue this conversation, or would you prefer to wait until we're in court?" The 2 men exchanged uncomfortable glances and quickly backed away. "We were just told this was a routine eviction," one of them muttered. "We don't want any part of this." Karen's face contorted with rage as her helpers abandoned her. "You think you're so smart," she snarled, "but I have connections in this town you couldn't imagine. By the time I'm done with you, you'll wish you just walked away from this house." The judge granted our emergency injunction that same day, temporarily securing my right to stay in my home while the case proceeded. Jennifer also filed a criminal complaint with the district attorney's office, complete with the hospital records, the forged deed, and security footage of Karen's visit. The investigation moved surprisingly quickly. The notary whose stamp appeared on the deed transfer had no record or recollection of the transaction, and a handwriting expert confirmed the signature wasn't mine. Bank records showed Karen had made several large purchases of furniture and appliances the day after acquiring my home, suggesting she fully intended to move in. The most damning evidence came from Karen's laptop, which the police seized with a warrant. They found multiple drafts of the deed transfer document, internet search history for topics like how to claim abandoned property and forging signatures, and even a floor plan of my house with notes about which room she would redecorate. First 3 weeks after my return from the hospital, we had our day in court. Karen arrived looking confident, dressed immaculately in a business suit with an expensive handbag. She apparently thought her standing in the community would shield her from consequences. She was wrong. The judge, an older woman with steel gray hair and piercing eyes, reviewed the evidence with increasing disbelief. When Karen's attorney tried to suggest there had been a misunderstanding about my hospital stay, the judge cut him off and quote, "Counsel, the evidence shows your client forged documents claiming ownership of a property while its rightful owner was hospitalized with a life-threatening condition," and quote. The judge stated with barely contained anger and quote, "There is no misunderstanding here, there is only criminal fraud of the most egregious kind." When Karen finally took the stand, her facade began to crack under Jennifer's questioning. She initially maintained that I had signed the document before going to the hospital, but when confronted with the timestamp discrepancies and medical records showing I was physically incapable of signing anything, she changed her story. "He was going to sell it to me anyway," she claimed, her voice rising defensively. "We had an understanding. I just expedited the paperwork. Do you have any documentation of this understanding?" Jennifer asked. "No, it was a sentencing verbal agreement," Karen replied, her eyes darting around the courtroom. "A verbal agreement with a man who was unconscious in intensive care?" Jennifer pressed. "That's your testimony under oath." Karen's composure finally shattered. "He didn't deserve that house," she shouted, rising from her seat while the judge banged her gavel. "He moved into our neighborhood and immediately started breaking rules. That garden was an eyesore. His mailbox violated regulations. Someone had to teach him a lesson." The courtroom fell silent as Karen seemed to realize what she had just admitted. Her attorney put his head in his hands. The judge didn't bother hiding her disgust. "Mrs. Winters, this court finds that you knowingly and willfully committed forgery, fraud, and attempted theft of real property. These are serious felonies in this state." She turned to the bailiff and quote, "Please take the defendant into custody," and quote. Karen's eyes widened in genuine shock as the bailiff approached with handcuffs and quote, "You can't be serious," and quote. She gasped, backing away and quote, "I'm the president of the Homeowners Association. I volunteer at the community center. People respect me." "Mrs. Winters," the judge replied coldly, "you attempted to steal a man's home while he was fighting for his life in a hospital. You will be held without bail pending formal sentencing." The judge looked at me directly. "Sir, I am ordering an immediate nullification of the fraudulent deed transfer. Your property remains yours legally and unequivocally. Additionally, the court will order Mrs. Winters to pay restitution for any legal fees you incurred fighting this fraud." Looking back at Karen, who was now being led away in handcuffs, the judge delivered her final blow. "Mrs. Winters, based on the severity of these charges and your apparent lack of remorse, you are looking at a minimum of 5 to 7 years in state prison and fines up to $75,000. Karen's face drained of all color as the reality of her situation finally seemed to hit her. But my reputation," she stammered as the bailiff guided her toward the door. "My position in the community. You should have thought of that before you committed felony fraud," and quote. The judge replied simply, already turning her attention to the next case on her docket.